A small-town hero risks everything for a forgotten veteran, facing betrayal and heartbreak. Will his kindness survive a community's scorn? Stay to uncover a tale of quiet courage and hope. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, stories that give you chills. The sun barely peeked over the horizon, painting the sleepy town of Willow Creek in hues of gold. A 65-year-old man, Henry, shuffled down Main Street, his faded denim jacket hanging loose on his wiry frame. His boots, scuffed from years of honest work, crunched against the gravel. The air carried the scent of fresh coffee from Millie's diner, mingling with the faint tang of motor oil from the garage nearby. Henry's grey hair caught the morning breeze, and his eyes, lined with years of worry, still held a spark of stubborn hope. He'd been a mechanic once, fixing trucks for farmers until the factory closed a decade ago. Now, he scraped by on odd jobs, patching roofs, mending fences, anything to keep the lights on in his small clapboard house. His hands, calloused and stained, told stories of labour, but his heart carried heavier burdens. The war had taken his brother, a Vietnam vet, and the system had chewed up his dreams of a quiet retirement. Yet, Henry never let bitterness win. He waved at old Mrs. Carter, watering her geraniums, and tossed a grin at the paperboy, even if his own stomach growled. "Morning, Henry," Mrs. Carter called, her voice warm but frail. "Good morning," he replied, tipping his cap, his voice rough but kind. He pushed open the diner's door, the bell jingling softly. Inside, the smell of bacon and burnt toast wrapped around him like a familiar hug. Millie, the owner, wiped the counter with a rag, her apron stained from years of service. "Usual, Henry?" she asked, already reaching for the coffee pot. "Just coffee," he said, sliding onto a worn stool. His wallet held a crumpled 20, enough for a week's groceries if he stretched it. The diner was quiet, save for the hum of the jukebox playing an old Hank Williams tune. Henry sipped his coffee, the bitter warmth grounding him. He glanced at a faded photo taped to the cash register. His brother in uniform, grinning under a jungle sky. "Miss you, Tommy," he whispered, barely audible. The bell jingled again, and a stranger shuffled in. A 70-year-old man, his green army coat threadbare, his white hair thinning under a tattered cap. He limped slightly, favouring his left leg, and his hands trembled as he eased onto a stool 2 seats away. His face was weathered, eyes hollow, like he'd seen too much and said too little. "Coffee, Black," he muttered to Millie, his voice low, almost lost in the jukebox's twang. Henry noticed the man's coat. Vietnam-era patches sewn on the sleeves, faded but proud. He recognized that look, the same one his brother had after coming home. The stranger's hands fumbled with a crumpled letter, stuffing it into his pocket like it burned. Millie set the coffee down, her eyes soft with concern. "Everything okay, friend?" she asked. The stranger nodded, but his jaw tightened, and he stared into his cup like it held answers. Henry felt a tug in his chest. He knew that silence, the kind that hid pain too heavy for words. Without thinking, he slid his 20 across the counter. "His coffee's on me," Henry said, his voice steady but quiet. The stranger's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Don't need charity," he said, his tone sharp, almost defensive. "Ain't charity," Henry replied, meeting his gaze. "Just a thank you. For serving." The stranger's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, his guard dropped. He nodded barely and muttered, "Thanks." Millie raised an eyebrow but said nothing, ringing up the order. Henry didn't know why he did it. $20 was half his grocery money, but something about the man, the weight he carried, felt like a debt Henry owed. The stranger sipped his coffee, and Henry caught a glimpse of the letter sticking out of his pocket. The envelope was worn, addressed in shaky handwriting, with a return address from a VA hospital. Henry didn't pry. He finished his coffee, left a tip he couldn't afford, and stepped back into the crisp morning air. The stranger stayed at the counter, staring into his cup like it was the only thing keeping him anchored. Henry walked home, the town waking up around him. Kids ran to the school bus, and shopkeepers swept their stoops. His house, a modest 2-bedroom with peeling paint, waited at the end of Oak Street. Inside, the walls held memories, a photo of his brother, a rusted wrench from their old garage, a dream of fixing things that stayed broken. He didn't know it yet, but that $20 was the spark of something bigger, something that would test his heart and shake Willow Creek to its core. The next morning, Henry was back at the diner, same stool, same coffee. The stranger was there again, same coat, same tired eyes. This time, he sat closer, one stool away. "Name's Walter," he said, voice gruff, but softer than yesterday. "Henry," he replied, nodding. Walter's hands were steadier today, but the letter was still in his pocket, crumpled tighter. "Saw you fixing Mrs. Carter's fence yesterday," Walter said, almost like he was testing the waters. "Did a good job?" "Keeps me busy," Henry said, a small smile tugging at his lips. They didn't talk much, just traded a few words about the weather, the diner's coffee, the way the town used to be. But there was a warmth in the silence, a quiet understanding. Walter mentioned he was staying at the motel on Route 6, a rundown place with flickering neon signs. "Saves money," he said, but his eyes hinted at a story he wasn't ready to tell. Henry didn't push. He'd learned from his brother that some wounds only heal in their own time. Instead, he paid for Walter's coffee again, ignoring the man's half-hearted protest. "It's just coffee," Henry said, shrugging. Walter looked at him, long and hard, then nodded. "You're a good man, Henry." The words hit harder than Henry expected. He wasn't used to hearing them, not from his brother, not from the town, not from the system that forgot men like Walter. As he left the diner, Millie caught his arm. "You sure you can keep buying his coffee, Henry? You ain't exactly flush." "I'll manage," he said, but her frown stayed with him. That afternoon, Henry was at the hardware store, picking up nails for a job. Walter was there too, browsing the paint aisle, his coat looking even shabbier in the fluorescent light. Henry noticed Walter's hesitation, the way he checked prices and put cans back. Without a word, Henry grabbed a small can of blue paint. Walter had mentioned liking the colour and slipped it into his own basket. At the register, he paid for it and handed it to Walter outside. "For whatever you're fixing up," Henry said, casual, like it was nothing. Walter stared at the can, his throat bobbing. "Why you doing this?" he asked, voice raw. Henry shrugged. "Figure you could use a win." Walter's eyes glistened, but he didn't say more. He just gripped the can like it was a lifeline and walked away, his limp more pronounced in the midday heat. Henry watched him go, feeling a mix of warmth and worry. He didn't know Walter's story, but he knew the weight of being forgotten. And he'd be damned if he let another vet carry that alone. The days in Willow Creek rolled on, each one blending into the next. But something shifted in Henry's routine. He found himself looking for Walter at the diner, his eyes scanning the stools each morning. The 70-year-old veteran was there most days, his green army coat a constant, its frayed cuffs brushing the counter. Their conversations grew longer, though never loud. Walter spoke in fragments, mentions of a daughter he hadn't seen in years, a life spent moving from one VA clinic to another. Henry listened, nodding, letting the silences fill with the hum of the jukebox or the clink of Millie's dishes. One morning, Walter pulled out a worn dog tag from under his shirt, its edges smoothed by time. "Belonged to my buddy," he said, voice low. "Lost him in Nam. Kept this to remember." Henry's throat tightened. He thought of his brother's medals, tucked in a drawer at home, untouched since the funeral. "Sounds like a good man," Henry said, his voice steady but soft. Walter nodded, tucking the tag away. "He was." Henry didn't ask more, but he started bringing small things to the diner. A newspaper he'd finished, a spare pair of gloves when the mornings turned crisp. Each gesture was quiet, deliberate, like laying stones for a path. Walter accepted them with a grunt or a nod, but his eyes softened, and Henry saw trust building, slow but sure. One afternoon, Henry spotted Walter at the town square, sitting on a bench with a sketch pad. The veteran's pencil moved in careful strokes, drawing the old oak tree that shaded the park. Henry approached, his boots scuffing the gravel. "Didn't know you drew?" he said, sitting beside him. Walter shrugged, his cap low over his eyes. "Keeps my hands busy, mind quieter." The sketch was rough but striking, gnarled branches, leaves catching light. Henry saw the care in it, the same care Walter hid behind his gruff voice. "Mind if I keep this?" Henry asked, pointing to the sketch. Walter hesitated, then tore it out and handed it over. "Suit yourself?" Henry tucked it into his jacket, feeling its weight more than paper should carry. Back at home, he pinned it to his fridge, next to his brother's photo. It felt right, like Walter was part of something bigger now. The town, though, started to notice Henry's actions, and not everyone approved. At the hardware store, Old Man Jenkins, with his suspenders and permanent scowl, cornered Henry by the nails. "You're wasting money on that drifter," Jenkins said, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "He'll be gone by winter, mark my words." Henry kept his gaze on the nails, picking out a handful. "He's a vet, Jenkins. Deserves better than that." Jenkins snorted. "Plenty of vets. Can't save 'em all." Across the aisle, Mrs. Carter overheard, her lips pursed. She'd always liked Henry, but even she whispered to a friend later, "He's got his own bills to pay. Why's he fussing over a stranger?" Millie, at the diner, was kinder but worried. "Henry, you're giving too much," she said one evening, wiping down the counter. "That paint, the gloves, the coffee, it adds up." Henry shrugged, his eyes on his coffee cup. "I'm fine, Millie. Millie, sir. Always am." But the truth was, his wallet was thinner than ever. He'd skipped a power bill to buy Walter's gloves, and his fridge held little more than bread and eggs. Still, he didn't regret it. Walter's small smiles, the way he sat straighter now, were worth more than a full pantry. The community's mixed reactions crystallized one chilly morning at the town hall. Henry had been hired to fix the hall's leaky roof, a job that paid just enough to cover his overdue bills. As he hauled his ladder through the square, he saw Walter sitting on his usual bench, sketchpad in hand. A group of teens, led by Tommy Grayson, the mayor's son, loitered nearby, their laughter sharp. "Hey, old man," Tommy called to Walter, tossing a soda can at the bench. "Draw me something pretty." The can clattered to the ground, and Walter flinched, his pencil stilling. Henry's jaw tightened. He set the ladder down and walked over, his boots heavy on the pavement. "Pick it up," he said to Tommy, his voice low but firm. Tommy smirked, his friends snickering. "What, you his bodyguard now, Henry?" "Pick it up." Henry's eyes locked on Tommy's, unyielding. The boy's smirk faltered. He grabbed the can, muttering under his breath, and tossed it into a bin before stalking off. Walter looked at Henry, his expression unreadable. "Didn't need you to do that," he said, but his voice lacked its usual edge. Henry shrugged. "Didn't do it for you. Did it 'cause it was right." The incident rippled through Willow Creek. By noon, the diner was buzzing with talk. Some, like Mrs. Carter, praised Henry's stand. "About time someone put Tommy in his place," she said, sipping her tea. Others, like Jenkins, scoffed. "Henry's playing hero for a bum. Gonna regret it when he's broke." The mayor, Grayson Sr., caught wind of it and wasn't pleased. He called Henry to his office that afternoon, his tie crisp, his desk gleaming. "Henry, you're a good man, but you embarrassed my son," Grayson said, leaning back in his chair. "And this veteran you're helping, folks say he's trouble. No job, no roots. You sure he's worth it?" Henry stood, hands in his pockets, his denim jacket smelling of sawdust. "He served, Mayor. That's worth more than a job." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "Fine, but the roof job? It's yours only if you keep your nose clean. No more scenes." Henry nodded, but his stomach churned. The job was his lifeline. Without it, he'd lose his house. Yet, walking out, he saw Walter across the square, sketching under the oak, and his resolve hardened. He'd keep helping, job or no job. The conflict escalated the next day. Henry was at the town hall, patching the roof, when Tommy and his friends showed up. They leaned against a truck, watching him work, their voices loud. "Heard you're broke, Henry," Tommy called. "Spending all your cash on that hobo?" Henry ignored them, hammering a nail with more force than needed. But the words stung. He'd heard the whispers at the diner, the grocery store, the post office. Folks he'd known for years now looked at him with pity or scorn. Even Millie had started slipping him extra toast, her way of saying she was worried. That evening, Henry found Walter at the motel, sitting on a plastic chair outside his room. The neon sign flickered, casting red light on Walter's face. Henry handed him a thermos of coffee, the metal warm in his hands. "Thought you might need this," he said. Walter took it, his fingers brushing the thermos's smooth surface. "You don't quit, do you?" he said, almost a question. Henry grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not yet. They sat in silence, the night air smelling of pine and asphalt. Walter mentioned a letter he'd gotten, a rejection from a housing program. Said I don't qualify, he said, his voice flat. Too old? No steady income. Henry's chest ached. He knew that betrayal, the system promising help and delivering nothing. I'll make some calls, Henry said. Someone's got to have answers. Walter shook his head. Don't. You've done enough. But Henry was already planning, his mind racing with names of old contacts, anyone who might help. He didn't see Tommy Grayson watching from across the street, his phone recording, a smirk on his face. By morning, the video was all over Willow Creek's small online forum. Local man wastes money on drifter, the caption read, with blurry footage of Henry handing Walter the thermos. Comments piled up. Henry's lost it. That vet's probably scamming him. Someone tell him to stop. At the diner, Jenkins slapped his phone on the counter, showing Millie the post. Told ya, Henry's a fool, he said, loud enough for Henry to hear from his stool. Henry's coffee went cold in his hands. He felt eyes on him, Millie's, Mrs. Carter's, strangers. For the first time, doubt crept in. Was he wrong? Was Walter just a lost cause? He pushed the thought away, but it lingered, heavy as the hammer in his toolbox. The air in Willow Creek grew colder, the November chill settling into Henry's bones. He climbed the town hall roof each morning, his hammer's rhythm a steady pulse against the growing whispers. The online video had spread like wildfire. And now every glance in the diner, every hushed conversation at the grocery store felt like a judgment. Henry's hands, once sure, fumbled with nails, his mind caught in a loop of doubt. Was he a fool? Had he thrown away his last chance for a man who'd vanished like smoke? That morning, he sat at Millie's diner, the familiar smell of burnt toast no longer comforting. His coffee cup was half empty, the ceramic cool against his palms. Walter's stool was empty. Henry's eyes flicked to it, expecting the veteran's green coat, his quiet grunt as he settled in. Nothing. He'd been absent yesterday too, and the day before. Henry's chest tightened, a gnawing worry he couldn't shake. Seen Walter? He asked Millie, his voice low, almost afraid of the answer. She shook her head, wiping the counter with a rag that smelled faintly of bleach. Not since Tuesday. Heard he checked out of the motel. Henry's stomach dropped. Checked out? No goodbye, no note, just gone. He stared at the empty stool, the jukebox's soft croon mocking him with an old Johnny Cash tune. Had Walter taken his kindness and run? The thought burned, sharper than the cold outside. He paid for his coffee, ignoring Millie's concerned frown, and stepped into the grey morning. The town square was quiet, the oak tree bare, its branches clawing at the sky. Walter's bench was empty, the sketch pad he'd always carried nowhere in sight. Henry's boots scuffed the gravel as he stood there, fists clenched in his jacket pockets. Damn it, Walter, he muttered, his breath visible in the air. He'd given so much, money, time, hope, and now it felt like a betrayal, not just by Walter, but by his own heart. The community's condemnation hit harder that day. At the hardware store, Jenkins leaned against the counter, his voice carrying. Told you that drifter'd skip town, he said to a group of regulars. Henry's out here playing saint, and for what? Nothing. Mrs. Carter, usually kind, avoided Henry's eyes as she passed, her scarf pulled tight against the wind. Even Millie, pouring his coffee later, said softly, Maybe Jenkins is right, Henry. You tried, but some folks can't be saved. Henry's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. The words cut deeper because he half believed them. Tommy Grayson and his friends were bolder now, their taunts louder. As Henry worked on the roof, they gathered below, tossing pebbles that clinked against the shingles. Where's your buddy, Henry? Tommy shouted, his voice dripping with mockery. Guess he got what he wanted. Henry gripped his hammer, knuckles white, his heart pounding. He wanted to shout back, to tell them they didn't understand, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? Walter was gone, and the town saw him as a fool. That evening, he sat alone in his truck, parked by the motel on Route 6. The neon sign flickered, its buzz the only sound in the dusk. He'd gone inside, asked the clerk about Walter. Checked out Wednesday, the clerk said, barely looking up. Didn't say where to. Henry's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, the leather worn smooth under his fingers. He felt the weight of every choice, every coffee, every pair of gloves, every dollar he'd given. His house payment was due, and he had nothing left. The roof job might not even save him if Grayson pulled it. Tears stung his eyes, and he let them fall, his voice breaking in the quiet cab. Was it worth it? He whispered, to no one. The town's scorn peaked the next day. A letter arrived from the mayor's office, delivered by a smirking Tommy. Official warning, Tommy said, tossing it onto Henry's porch. Keep causing trouble, and you're off the roof job. Henry read the letter, its formal tone cold. Disruptive behaviour, public disturbance, reconsider your priorities. He crumpled it, his chest heaving. The system, the town, even his own hope, it all felt like a betrayal. At the diner, a new post on the town forum was the talk of the morning. Henry's charity scam, it read, claiming he was funneling money to Walter for some shady deal. The lies stung, but what hurt more was the silence from those he'd called friends. Mrs. Carter didn't wave anymore. Millie's smiles were forced. Henry felt alone, smaller than he'd ever been. That night, he sat on his porch, the air smelling of frost and pine. The town was quiet, the stars sharp above. He pulled Walter's sketch from his pocket, the oak tree's lines blurred from handling. He traced the branches with his thumb, remembering Walter's careful strokes, the way his hand steadied when he drew. Henry's mind drifted to his brother, to the nights they'd sat on this same porch, dreaming of a garage they'd run together. Keep going, Henry, his brother had said once, his voice rough from chemo. Don't let the world make you hard. Henry's eyes burned. He'd tried to live that way, to keep his heart open despite the losses, his brother, his job, his dreams. But now, with Walter gone and the town against him, he wondered if he'd been wrong. He held the sketch tighter. Its paper soft against his calloused fingers. I didn't do this for me, he said aloud, his voice steadying. I did it for you, Tommy. For Walter. For every vet the system forgot. The words anchored him, pulling him back from the edge. He wouldn't quit. Not yet. He folded the sketch and tucked it away, his resolve hardening like steel in a forge. The town could talk, the mayor could threaten, but Henry knew who he was. He was the man who fixed things, who gave when it hurt, who honoured the sacrifices others forgot. As he stood, the wind carried the faint sound of a truck down the road. Henry didn't know it, but that truck would bring answers, and a reckoning for Willow Creek. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow over Willow Creek. Henry stood on his porch, the air crisp with the scent of frost and wood smoke. His hands, still clutching Walter's sketch, felt heavier than usual. The town's silence weighed on him, but he'd made his choice, to keep going, no matter the cost. He didn't expect the black SUV that rolled up his gravel driveway, its tyres crunching softly. A woman stepped out, mid-50s, her dark hair pulled back, her coat sharp and professional. She carried a folder, her expression serious but kind. Mr. Henry? She asked, her voice clear in the quiet morning. He nodded, wary. That's me. I'm Ellen Carter, no relation to your neighbour, she said with a small smile. I'm with the Veterans Support Network. May we talk? Henry led her inside, the warmth of his small kitchen a contrast to the chill outside. The coffee pot hissed as he poured 2 cups, the ceramic mugs warm against his palms. Ellen set her folder on the table, its edges worn but neat. I'm here about Walter, she said, and Henry's heart skipped. He mentioned you before he left. Left? Henry's voice was rough, the word catching. Where'd he go? Ellen's eyes softened. Walter passed away last week. Heart failure, at the VA hospital in Colton. He'd been sick for a while but didn't tell anyone. Henry's breath caught, the room tilting. He gripped the mug, its heat grounding him. Walter, gone. The man he'd bought coffee for, whose sketch hung on his fridge, whose silences he'd learned to read. I didn't know, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Ellen nodded, her gaze steady. Walter was private, but he told me about you, how you helped him, no questions asked. That meant more than you know. She opened the folder, pulling out a letter in Walter's shaky handwriting. "He wrote this for you," she said, sliding it across the table. Henry's hands trembled as he unfolded it. The paper smelled faintly of ink and time, its words simple but heavy. "Henry," it read, "you gave me dignity when I had none. Don't let this town break you. You're the kind of man I fought for. Keep fighting. Walter." Henry's throat burned, tears blurring the words. He set the letter down, his fingers tracing the signature. Ellen spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. "Walter was part of our outreach program, connecting veterans with support. He'd been homeless for years, estranged from his daughter. Your kindness, coffee, gloves, that paint, gave him hope. He reached out to his daughter before he died. They reconciled because of you." Henry looked up, stunned. "His daughter?" Ellen nodded. "She's coming to Willow Creek next week to collect his things. She wants to meet you." Henry's mind reeled. He'd thought Walter was alone, a drifter with no ties. But his small acts, $20, a can of paint, had rippled further than he'd imagined. "There's more," Ellen said, pulling out a document. "Walter left a request with our network. He wanted us to help you." She slid the paper over, a contract for a grant. "Our organisation funds community projects for veterans. Walter suggested your property could host a workshop space, tool repair, woodworking, a place for vets to rebuild skills and purpose. We'd cover the costs and you'd oversee it. It's not charity. It's a partnership." Henry stared at the numbers, his heart pounding. Enough to save his house, to keep the lights on, to build something lasting. "Why me?" he asked, voice hoarse. Ellen smiled. "Because Walter saw what we see, a man who gives when it's hard. That's who we trust with this." The news spread through Willow Creek like a spring thaw. Ellen met with the mayor, her folder of documents silencing his objections. The town hall roof job was secured for Henry, no strings attached. But the real reckoning came at the diner, where the truth about Walter unravelled the town's lies. Jenkins, red-faced, muttered an apology when Ellen shared Walter's story. His service, his struggles, his final days. Mrs. Carter, tears in her eyes, hugged Henry, whispering, "I should have trusted you." Tommy Grayson's online post was deleted, his father grounding him after a public dressing down. Millie, pouring Henry's coffee, slipped him a slice of pie, on the house. "You proved him wrong, Henry," she said, her smile wide. Henry didn't gloat. He sat quietly, Walter's letter in his pocket. Its words louder than the town's chatter. The workshop took shape over the next month. Henry's backyard, once overgrown, became a hub of activity. Veterans from Colton and beyond came to hammer nails, sandwood, and share stories. The air smelled of sawdust and hope, the clank of tools, a new rhythm for Willow Creek. Juntises. Carter started a fundraiser for supplies, and even Jenkins donated a box of screws, his gruff "good work" a grudging olive branch. The community shifted, slowly but surely. The diner began a pay-it-forward board where folks covered meals for veterans. Kids, once led by Tommy, painted a mural on the town hall. A soldier's silhouette under an oak tree, a nod to Walter. Henry, at the centre of it, felt a purpose he hadn't known since his brother's days. He wasn't just fixing things anymore. He was building something that would outlast him. Walter's daughter Sarah arrived one crisp morning. She was in her 40s, her eyes carrying her father's quiet strength. She hugged Henry, her voice breaking as she thanked him. "Dad said you were his friend," she said, handing him Walter's dog tag. "He'd want you to have this." Henry held the tag, its metal cool and smooth, and slipped it into his pocket next to the sketch. It was a piece of Walter, a reminder of why he'd kept going. The legacy of Henry's kindness grew beyond the workshop. Veterans who'd once drifted through Willow Creek now stayed, finding jobs, homes, community. Sarah started a scholarship in her father's name, funding art classes for vets, inspired by Walter's sketches. Henry, once the town's fool, became its quiet hero, his story whispered with pride at the diner. He found peace not in the praise, but in the work. Each hammer strike, each vet's smile, a tribute to Walter and his brother. On a clear evening, Henry sat on his porch, the workshop's lights glowing in the distance. The air smelled of pine and fresh paint, the stars bright above. He held Walter's dog tag, its weight a comfort, and looked at the oak tree across the street, its branches swaying gently. He thought of his brother, of Walter, of every small act that had led to this moment. Sometimes, he said softly, giving when it's hard is what matters most. The town was quieter now, but it hummed with a new energy. Proof that one man's heart could change everything. Love this story? Drop a word in the comments. Hope, courage, anything it sparked in you. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Stories like these, full of heart and grit, are why we're here.